Now, you remember when we started talking about this, I told you that there'll be a lot of things in this series that would not matter actually to your salvation. If we're not 100% right on some of this stuff, it's not going to matter if you go to heaven. It's not going to change where you're going to spend eternity. It's not going to change a lot of that stuff. Some of this stuff is that important. Some of it is not. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about tonight is pretty important. The stuff when we start talking about Abraham and Isaac, that's pretty important stuff. Now, the stuff on Ishmael and Hagar, not quite so. But I want to start out this statement and see if I can spur. How many of you actually read chapter 16 of the book of Genesis? Anybody actually read chapter 16? How many of you flipped over, what was it, chapter 22, 1 through some verses there? Yeah, that right there. How many of you read that part? All right, so a lot of you are ready for this discussion tonight. So let's start out with step number one. Ishmael is not the son of Abraham. True or false? So how many of you would say Ishmael is not the father of Abraham, or the son of Abraham? Raise your hand. For all of you who say those people have lost their mind, don't know how to read their Bible, Ishmael is the firstborn son of Abraham. Raise your hand. Oh, y'all don't want to play. Y'all are scared to even answer now. I can't even get people to raise their hand. It's like popcorn. Oh, no, I give up. I'm not even trying. So let me say this. Ishmael is not the son of Abraham because Ishmael is the son of Abram. What's the difference? Same dude, but was he the same dude? Was he the same DNA? Woo! Was he the same DNA genetic code? Yes, he was. Was he the same guy? No, he was not. I will tell you this. If God changes your name, he changes your future. If God comes on the scene and you are Jacob, and when he leaves the scene, you are no longer Jacob but Israel, he just changed your forever. Who you were is not who you have always been. Who you will be is not who you was. That's right, you just got reborn. And so when I look at Ishmael is the son of Abram and not the son of Abraham, some of you might say it's just schematics. The guy had this, they had the same DNA. Abraham, same guy in the physical, but were they the same man? And the answer is absolutely not. I'm going to tell you that Abram was a different kind of father to Ishmael than Abraham was a father to Isaac. He was a different kind of daddy to this son than this daddy was to this son. We're going to look at some of that tonight. And we're going to actually kind of look at the Abraham-Isaac situation versus the Abram-Ishmael situation. How he treated one son, how he treated the other son, and why there is a difference between the two of them. So that's some of the stuff we're going to look at tonight. But before I do, I want to tell you a story about a guy I ran across. You know, as pastors, we run across people all the time that are in different walks of life. And so I want to tell you, I kind of jotted this down so I could kind of remember it. But I ran into this guy, and life was a burden for this guy. He had to move around a lot. Basically, what he had was what he could carry on his back. He felt like God had told him to pack everything he had and go over here, and he was going to prosper. When he gets over there, he nearly starved to death. Things didn't go like he thought it was supposed to. So then he feels like God's telling him to go over here, and he picks up and moves everything he had over there. While he does that, his wife of many years, when they get to the second town that he feels like God had called him to, picks up, runs off with another guy. And so while that's happening, he chases her down, hunts her down, gets her back, brings her back home. In the process of that, he has a nephew that he's trying to raise. The nephew runs off, steals half of everything the guy had. All he had was everything he could carry on his back, but his nephew steals half of it, gets into a bunch of trouble, and don't you know, then he has to go rescue the nephew that's in all this trouble. Drama. I mean, y'all have seen this happen in life. So he gets the nephew back to the house. After that, he goes back and he's trying to get back into his ministry, get back to where he feels like God is sending him. And the next thing you know, his wife, he ends up having an affair with his wife's best friend. She gets pregnant. They end up having a baby. Then he decides, I know what I need to do. I need to get deeper into ministry. While he's trying to get deeper into ministry, he finds out this nephew that he's rescued gets over into the homosexual agenda, buries himself into the homosexual agenda. He does everything he can to try to get that boy out of that process. In the meantime, his wife runs off on him again. He has to chase her down, get her back, bring him back. Finally, him and his wife have their own kid. Then the kid nearly dies. I just told you the story of Abraham in modern day vernacular. Does that not sound like days of our lives? I mean, we read all this stuff in the Bible, and we get caught up in the reading of the these and the thous and all that, and we forget, guys, the Bible is relative to the modern world. When I read Abraham's story to you in the modern, if I use modern language and I was to, really kind of put it in modern perspective, you might think I'm talking to the guy across the street from your house, because you've watched this same thing happen. Wife left, wife came back, baby mama gets in the picture, then there's a baby, and that causes all kinds of trouble in the family. Then wife runs off again, then he brings wife back, and other extended family moves in and tries to live with them, but that don't work, and it costs. I mean, do y'all not see this every day? You work with people that are going through it every day. Some of your families have been through it. And so I like to tell the story of Abraham from that point of view to let people know, listen, just because the story has a bunch of these and thous in it, and just because it's in the book of Genesis, doesn't mean it's not relative to how we are in today, 2017. The Word of God is relative to every generation. The rules, the laws, the precedents that were set in the book of Genesis are the same precedents that need to be established in our lives right now, 2017. They're not old, they're not outdated, they're forever and eternal. And if they work back then, they'll work right now. So how many of you have ever thought about Abraham in that context? No, but did I tell his story? Yes, I did. Pretty close. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there to you and let you think about that part of it. I want to, and I know this is going to be just a little bit off topic, just half a second, but how many of you know how many children Ishmael had? 10 plus 2 is 12. How many children did Jacob have? 12. How many tribes of Israel are there? 12. Isaac, let me get my tongue wrapped around this. Isaac had Esau and Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, which are the fathers of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? Ishmael had 12 sons. And the other day when I was studying this out, I thought that the Lord just, I think, whispered a question into my heart. I wonder if the names of the sons of Ishmael, written in chronological order, will tell a story. And so I chased down the names of the sons of Ishmael, and I wrote them out in chronological order, and then I went and tracked down what each of those names meant, and wrote out beside each of those names what each of those names meant. And it tells the story of Ishmael's life. So then I thought, I wonder if the sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, if I were to write them out in chronological order, chase down what those words meant, write out the definition of what those words mean, will they tell me a story? And what I found was the story of your redemption in Christ Jesus in both of those. So I want to read that to you tonight, okay? So I'm not going to actually read you the names of Ishmael's sons, because I wouldn't even pronounce them right in the first place. Yes. No, the first lineage points to the covenant between God and Ishmael. Trouble, trouble, rat and rubble. Yes. Isaac's lineage shows me the story of Christ. Yeah, the dash. Yes, the dash. Sometimes I go too fast and I run over the dashes. So, and that trips people up. But anyway, let me read you. The name Ishmael means God will hear. Now, those of you who read the story, whenever Ishmael and Hagar were in the bush, out in the wilderness, whose cry was heard? Ishmael's cry was heard, not Hagar's. We'll look at that more in just a second. Ishmael's name means God will hear. Who heard Ishmael's cry? God did. All right? So then, if you going through the names of his sons in order, you come up with a story like this. God will hear, sends a covenant that would bring fruitfulness. But in the darkness and mourning of Ishmael's heart, he could not go forward. So he fell into the chastening and the disciplines of God to bring him back to be the fragrance that he was designed to be. And hearing the voice of God, he should have turned his heart, but fell into the silence of death within him because of the mental burden that he was carrying, until he began to lock himself in the inner chamber of his heart and begin to entertain a foreign individual who would speak lies into him. And then he built a wall around himself and refreshed himself in his anger and hatred, and set a precedence for all his generations. Yeah, that's out of the names of Ishmael. Now, do you not see how many of y'all read the covenant with Ishmael, between Ishmael and God? A glaring statement should have been right there that he said, you will be a wild man. And all men will be against you, and you will be against all men. Why? Because there's a spirit of bitterness and resentment in the heart of all Muslims because they're still mad at Abraham for sending them away like he did. To this day, they fight over Jerusalem not because they don't want the Jews on the land, but they fight with the Jews on the land specifically because the Jews say he was our daddy and Ishmael says he's my daddy, and there's a battle between them for the inheritance of the land for the rightful son. The firstborn of the flesh versus the firstborn of promise. The hatred that's instilled there is not because they just can't live on the same property. The hatefulness that is there is because Ishmael bore a burden of rejection by his father. And it set a precedent for the generations of his life. Now, let me read you the story of Isaac through Jacob. Jacob means will rule as God. So, starting with the firstborn son, Reuben, the story would go like this. I will rule as God. See, I have sent you a son, and hearing, he will weave his life and twine it into your heart, and he will enter, and he will be celebrated. But then at the end of the celebration, he will be judged, and he will enter into his wrestling until he is overcome. But he will rise up from that happy, for he knows that he will bring a great reward when he brings his children into his habitation. So let him then add double fruit to all of those who will hear his calling as he forgives them of their sins and calls them the son of his right hand. Did I not just tell you the story of Jesus, who came out of the Jewish, who came through this line of Jacob and brought Jesus a son? I mean, to me, when I start looking at this stuff, you start chasing this stuff down and studying this out. Everywhere you look, there is lots of importance. Every jot, every tittle in the Scripture means something. So anyway, that was not part of the lesson, but when I found that, I thought, wow, Lord, it did tell me a story. It told me the story of Ishmael and his generations, and it told me the story of life for the Jews and their generation, right there in the definition of those kids. So any comments or questions on that? It is very interesting. The more I looked at it, the more I became carried away with that. I spent a small sum of time chasing that down, and but once I got a hold of it, I couldn't get loose from it. So I want to flip over to Genesis chapter 22. Verse 12, I forgot to tell you, Melissa, that I was going to start just for a minute there at the back of Genesis of last week. So if you can't get to that, that's okay. Genesis chapter 2, verse 12, we find Isaac and Abraham up on the mountain. We find the knife at Isaac's throat. Abraham's holding the knife there, and he's just about to kill his son. And we find an angel arrives. Let me try to get myself back to the right scripture here. Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. There it is. Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. And he said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, for me. Now, let me throw this out there to you. Something we've never talked about in covenant. When you look at the old law in the Old Testament, one of the things that happened with covenant is this. I gave you my firstborn son. You gave me your firstborn son. I raised your son in my house as mine. You raised my son in your house as yours. That was a tying of the covenant. What was the request from God to Abraham? Give me your son, your firstborn son in whom you love. You realize that scripture, that statement is the first time the word love is used in the whole Bible. Genesis chapter 22. I'm asking you for your son, the son whom you love, your firstborn son. Was it his firstborn son? Was it Abraham's firstborn son? Yes. Was it Abram's firstborn son? No. That's right. It was the firstborn son of promise. Where was Ishmael at the time that statement was made? He's gone. Does Abraham know where he is? No. Does Abraham know if he's dead or alive? No. Is Abraham have any contact with him? No. To Abraham's heart, is Ishmael dead or alive? Dead. Is Isaac his firstborn son? Yes. In Abraham's heart, yes, he's his firstborn son. And he says, so the very first place we see love mentioned, and he said, I want your firstborn son. How did God have the right to ask? He had the right to ask because he was cutting a covenant with Abraham, and he had the right to say, you give me your firstborn, and I will bring him into myself, and I will raise him as my own. If Abraham then refused to give his son, covenant would have been broken, and then the second party would have never offered his son. When did the Son of God arrive on the earth as an offering to finish the covenant between the two? His name was Jesus. Why did it have to happen? Why did the Abraham sacrifice have to happen? Because there are types and shadows. Y'all all know about seed time and harvest. And what we find is Abraham planted a seed on Mount Moriah. He planted a seed right there. Most of the Bible scholars think that the place that happened is actually right where the Temple Mount was, or is today, is where that took place. And so whenever God said, I want Isaac, he had the right to ask because he was a covenant that they were cutting, where everything I have is yours, everything you have is mine. I want your firstborn son. Abraham fulfilled that covenant by taking him up on the mountain, doing what he did, and then God did the second half of the covenant when he sent Christ. He fulfilled his half. If Abraham had not have done it, God would not have sent his son. It was the open door. It was the fulfilling of the covenant. That's why it was so infinitely important, okay? Now, back to Genesis chapter 22, verse 12. Why did the angel say don't twice? Don't sacrifice and don't touch. Think about that. In this scripture, he says, lay not your hand upon the lad, neither do anything to him. Why did the angel have to tell him twice? I'm pretty sure if Tony here had Roxanne and he was about to sacrifice Roxanne and he didn't really want to do it in the first place and he was right in the middle of it, and then an angel appeared bodily right in front of him and said, don't you touch that girl, I think Tony would stop after the first one. I don't think he'd have to be told twice. Number one, he don't really want to do it in the first place. He's not enjoying the process. And an angel that nobody's ever seen before, who wasn't there 5 seconds ago, pops out and says, stop it. And Tony would be like, whoo, okay, I got you. I'll remove my hand. But here we see the angel has to say, do not touch the lad, neither do anything to him. Why? And the reason is because Abraham was pressing to do something. He says, I am going to be faithful to God, and he was going to do it even in the face of an angel trying to stop him. He was going to do whatever it took to fulfill the covenant. Even if an angel, guys, Paul said, even if an angel comes and preaches to you any other gospel than what I have preached to you, do not listen to them, right? And so here, Abraham is so possessed, so pressing to do this. He's going to fulfill his promise to God regardless of what it costs him, that even in the front of that angel, he's going to finish it. Listen, did Jesus not say to the disciples, could I not have called 12 legions of angels right now and stop this thing? And I will say to you that in the garden, I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt within my own self, that there were angels present in the Garden of Gethsemane, standing right there, shield and sword, at the full ready. If you just say the word and we'll make this stop. And yet he would not relent. And I want you to notice this. And then the angel gives Abraham a great change of direction. Abraham, you're going to kill your son. But the angel gives him a change of direction. And I think this is a statement you need to hear. A sign of spiritual greatness is the ability to change direction even when you are going another way in faith. God gave you a direction for your life. You were at point A, point B is over here somewhere, and you are going this way to point B. I don't know how God works in your life, but seldom have I ever gone from point A to point B in my Christian walk like that. If anybody else has got it down like that, I want to talk to you and figure out how you got it done. Because most of the time, if I go from point A to point B, it looks something like this, right? But listen to me. Listen to this statement. It is a sign of spiritual maturity or greatness. The ability to change directions even when you are going a certain way in faith. I'm going by faith. I'm going by faith. God spoke. God said. I heard a word. I got a prophecy. I know I'm going the right direction. I'm doing everything I can. I'm in prayer. And then all of a sudden, I get a change in direction. It is a spiritual maturity to be going the way you think God told you to go and get a new direction from Father and turn at His word. Yes. But oftentimes what happens in people's spiritual life, they get a word and they begin to follow that word, and they're going to follow that word to its completion regardless of how it goes, where it goes. Look what would have happened if Abraham had not had the spiritual maturity to see the ram and turn in that direction. What would have been the end result? Abraham would have been dead, and the true will of God would not have been fulfilled. It was not God's will that Abraham actually be killed Isaac actually be killed by Abraham's hand. It was actually God's will that he would supply a lamb and the ram would be there in the thicket. All of that was God's will. And had he ignored the change of direction, and oftentimes, remember, let me throw this out there to you again, something we need to remember very, very importantly, that God judges men not because of what they might do or may do, but he judges men because of what they have done. And there may be a direction that comes into your life where God has given you a direction and it's going something like this because he was going to see what you would do, not what you might do. And once your faithfulness in what you will do has been established, then the direction changes. It was never God's will for you to do all this in the first place, but you had to be obedient from A to A.5 so that then he could turn you to B. Y'all are all looking at me like I'm preaching heresy tonight. Well, I'm trying to liven things up just a little bit. Yes. So, listen, anybody in this room, I mean, y'all are all looking at me real tight-lipped and quiet, and I'm getting some of these forehead things where you look at me over your eyebrows. But let me ask you this question. Anybody ever you've been following what you thought God's plan was for your life? You was full bore into it. You was going headlong right into it. And halfway there, you got a word that you had to make a decision. Was it God or was it flesh? Is God turning me? Has my direction changed? And tomorrow, am I different than I was today? Anybody ever been there? And I'm going to tell you, it is a sign of spiritual maturity to be able to hear the voice of God, because sometimes our want to gets in the way of our should. And sometimes our fear gets in the way of our should. Yes, that's exactly right. The flesh kind of got in the way right there. Yeah. Listen, there's two, I'm going to give you two pitfalls in hearing the voice of God. Two dangers that often come up when people say they've heard the voice of God. Number one is forgetting that he is master and lack humility. I've heard the voice of God. I know it was the voice of God, and I'm going to go headlong into it. I'm not listening to nobody else. I'm not looking at nothing else. I know I heard the voice of God, and in their pride run straight headlong, full bore, straight ahead, because they lack humility. God's never going to change his voice. He's never going to change his mind. He told me to do this, and I'm going to do this forever. That's one danger. Second danger is this: being humble to the extreme, which makes me frozen in place. I'm humble to the extreme, and that makes me frozen in place because I'm afraid to do anything because I have no confidence in him. I'm humble to the extreme. Yeah. So listen, here I am makes it right. Remember, Abraham said, here I am, here I am, here I am. When God called, he said, here I am. When Isaac spoke, he said, here I am. And when the angel spoke, he said, here I am. The here I am is what makes it right. That is a recognition of the mastery of God and my humility, still being able to hear when I'm called out to and respond faithfully. Every time God calls in your life, your answer should be, here I am. Not, no God, that's something different than you told me before. Not, no God, that's not the way I've always done it. Not, no God, that's not the way I want to go. Not, no God, I'm humbling myself to this old call and I'm never going to be changed because I'm humbling myself to this and I'm always just going to submit to the old word. Sometimes we need to hear the new word. I'm still looking at it. Some of you look, your heresy lights going beep, 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 beep. I see your heresy radar going off. It's happened to me, guys, more than once in my life. Becky, yeah, yes. And had the spiritual maturity to listen and hear a new direction. Absolutely, yes, yes. Everything you just said can be found in the story of Jonah. He heard the voice of God go from A to B. He decided to go to C. In the process of going to C, he birthed a whale, as long as we're walking in faith. Yes. And he wound up back in B, but he followed this path. Whatever path though that fish decided to swim was the path where he was supposed to go this way. He got there like the rest of us. He got spit out right up there. Yep. All right, so let's go now to Hagar and Ishmael. Let's answer some questions on Hagar and Ishmael. And I want you to first off note, let's see, Proverbs 18:14. You got that one for me? Proverbs 18:14. The spirit of a man will sustain him, but a wounded spirit who can bear? Note that last part. But a wounded spirit who can bear? And I want you to note a lack of interaction here between Hagar and Ishmael. And we have to ask ourselves, why was there no interaction between Hagar and Ishmael? When we look at what was going on with with Isaac and Abraham, there's a lot of interaction there. They're walking together. They're talking going up the mountain. You see there's a father-son interaction going on here. But when we find Hagar and Ishmael, we notice that there's a lot of lack of interaction. And the question is, why? Why was there a lack of interaction? And I want you to notice that she was cast out. It says that Abraham cast her out. And there's a problem with cast out there. If you go back and you look at it, Sarah said to Abraham, I want you to divorce this woman because I will not share my house with her and that boy, with us and the son of promise. And that boy is never going to share in the inheritance with our son. So I want you to divorce her. If you want to go back and look at it in the original, that's what she said. I want you to divorce her. Now, remember in the old law that they were allowed to divorce, and if he divorced her and gave her a writ of divorcement, then she was free to go and find another husband, produce children, move off. She took what was given to her in the divorce settlement, and she went on her way. But there's another thing that would happen there, and it was not divorce. It was called the casting off or putting away. And what would happen is these men, instead of divorcing these women, would just run them off, cast them off, not give them a divorcement, and they were no longer, under the divorce, they were free from the law of marriage. They could go get married, they could go produce children, they could make another home somewhere, but if they were cast off, they were not allowed to remarry. They were still married to the man that they had been married to. They were just destitute. They didn't live under his home. They did not live under his protection. He did not feed them. He did not clothe them. He did not come into them. He did not recognize her children any longer. He just cast her away. Sarah says, divorce her and send her out. Abraham did something entirely different. He cast her away. He did not divorce her. He cast her away. He sent her out, and she is in a spirit of brokenness. And as she's leaving in that spirit of brokenness, she is now doing the exact same thing to Ishmael that had been done to her. She's been cast off. Abraham said to Isaac, here I am. He said to God, here I am. He said to angel, here I am. He said to Hagar and Ishmael, I'm not here. I'm not here. And what happens is now, as a mother with going back to this verse, a wounded spirit who can bear. We find Hagar with a wounded spirit going out into the wilderness. She's in a place of mourning. And when she should have been standing up beside Ishmael and saying, Ishmael, regardless of what happens, here I am your mother. We find her doing exactly opposite. She throws him down under a bush and leaves. Why? It's not because she's mad at him. It's not because she hates him. It is because she is doing to her what has been done to her. Or excuse me, she's doing to him what has been done to her. How many people do we run across, especially in church settings? They've been wounded, they've been broken, their hearts have been crushed, they've been rejected, they've been orphaned in the spirit or in the physical or whatever, and the next thing you know, they will swear to you as children, as they're coming out of their situation, I will never act like I was treated. And in the next generation, they act exactly like they were treated. They had a broken spirit, they react in a broken spirit. They were rejected, then they reject. They were abused, now they are the abuser. Do we not see that over and over and over? And here we see it with Ishmael and with Hagar. Verse 15, it says, she casts, which is rough, him under the branches, not mean, but in broken-hearted despair. Now remember, how old is Ishmael here? How old is he? He's about 13. Remember, he's not a baby. She wasn't carrying him like this. They were walking along, and she cast him. He's getting weak. He don't have any water. They don't have any food. And she pushes him down under this bush and leaves him laying there. Then she moves herself afar off. Why did she remove herself? And the answer to that question is she did not want to see his death. She moved opposite him. There's no conversation. She does not talk to him. She only speaks to herself, and she just says, Lord, let me not see the death of my child. Go back to Abraham and Isaac. Abraham and Isaac look like this. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I'll walk with you hand in hand up the side of the mountain. I will be right here with you. If you die, I will be standing right here beside you. But we see exactly the opposite with Ishmael and Hagar. Hagar casts him down, moves herself away. Why? It's because she has a broken spirit, and she does not have enough strength within herself to move forward. Something else I find very interesting. If you'll look there where they were at, I think it's in Beersheba. And we find out that she's been here before. If you go back in time, the well at Beersheba, who dug it? Abraham dug the well at Beersheba. Where is she when she throws him down? At Beersheba. Had she been there before? You bet. Had she drawn water out of that well before? You bet. But she's in such despair, she doesn't even realize where she's at, and she can't even see the well of water that's right there in front of her. She'd been wandering in that wilderness. What's happened there? She has fallen so far into despair, she has no faith. We learn a lot right here about a broken heart. Despair had eaten her faith. How many times across people, even if they've been there before, they've walked through that circumstance before, they've walked through those problems before, they've been in this space before, and yet they've come upon it again, and because of despair, they cannot, by faith, see the well of life that they have drank out of over and over and over. They've camped beside it. They've dropped the bucket in it. They've pulled it up. They've even watered other people. She was a servant. She hadn't just drank out of that well herself, but she had even pulled the waters of life out of the well of Beersheba and fed them to Sarah and to Abraham. She was a servant. She would have given that water to other people in that same camp. She had been to this well before. She knew there was life there. But yet when she fell into such despair because she was of a broken heart that she could not find faith. And how many times do we run into people the exact same way, where they have been there before? They should know how to go to the well. They should know how to drink the water. They should know they've done it before. They've even led other people to it. And we look at them and we're thinking, why are you dying of thirst laying right there? You're within eyesight of the well, and your children are laying there dying. What are you doing? And the answer is this: because they are in brokenhearted despair. And because of the brokenhearted despair, they cannot find their faith. Does that make sense? So verse 16, and she went and sat her down over against a good way off, as if it were a bow shot, for she said, let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the, what? The child, the lad. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven and said unto her, what ails you, Hagar? Fear not. I think it's very interesting. Look, he asks her a question, and before she can talk, gives her the answer. What's wrong with you? Fear not. Isn't that interesting? He asks her what's wrong with her, and before she has any ability to respond, what's wrong with you, Hagar? Fear not. There's a reason why that she is being told that. What's wrong with you, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, hold him in thine hand, for I will make of him a great nation. Let me ask you a question. Why would they have known that? How is it possible that she would have known that he was going to be a great nation? How is it possible that she would have known any of that? How many of you read chapter 16? So let me go back to our days of the lives, chapter 16. Baby mama gets ran off. She gets mad because she finds out she's pregnant, and the wife gets all ill about the deal and starts throwing a fit. So baby mama runs off. She's with child, and she gets out there. I'm telling this Abraham story again in modern day vernacular, right? And so she gets out there in the woods all by herself, and God shows up and says to her, you carry a seed of a man that I have covenant with. And I make him a promise that his children would prosper and they would multiply. So there's going to be a man-child inside of you, and he will prosper and he will be multiplied. And he'll be a wild man, and all men will be against him, and everyone will hate him. Have y'all seen that? Y'all did read Genesis chapter 16. Is it not the definition of the Muslim nations and the Muslim people that we see today? You can see it right there in that. But the question is, now, jump from Genesis chapter 16 back over to where we are right this minute. The angel shows up, and there's Hagar over under this bush weeping about her son dying, and there's Ishmael right over there about a bow shot away, 13 years old, dying of thirst, probably passed out maybe from the heat or whatever, however you want to picture it in your mind. And the angel says, what's wrong with you? Fear not. Why did the angel have the right to say that? What chapter are we in? 21. What happened in 16? 13 years before. She got a covenant. She got a promise where God said to her, that child will live, and he will prosper, and he will have nations that will come out of him, and all of this is going to happen. And Hagar forgot the covenant. I wonder, Hagar is crying, God, don't let me see my child die. It doesn't tell us what Ishmael is saying over there under the bush. I'm going to give you my personal opinion. I think that his mother had said to him from the time she gave birth to him, You are going to be a father of many nations. Great peoples are going to come out of you. You are going to be a wild man, a hairy man. You're going to do all of these great things. God gave me a promise for you. And I know that kid over there, his mama's doting on him, and Abraham's giving him all the attention. But you listen to me. You're going to do this, and you're going to do this, because it was a covenant that she had heard from God, and I believe she had recounted it to him as a child. And while the mother was in despair with a broken heart under a bush crying, don't let him die, I believe Ishmael was over there under that other bush saying, God, you promised me this was going to be my calling, and this was going to be my election, and you said I was going to live and not die, and you said I was going to father nations, and you said I was going to do these things. Where are you, God? And I believe because of Ishmael quoted the word of God back to God with faith in God, God heard the cry of Ishmael and showed up at Hagar and shook her and said, what's wrong with you? Fear not. And the two statements should have an asterisk between them that says, see chapter 16. I believe that. Now, I keep trying to equate that to where we live today. I think oftentimes the angel needs to stand beside us in the middle of the night right by our bed when we're weeping and crying, God, don't let it die, don't let it die, don't let it die, and needs to say, fear not. What's wrong with you? Fear not. With an asterisk that points to a place in your life where you knew God, saw God, got a promise from God, received a covenant from God, found a word from God in His Word, stood on it for a while, and now you gave up on it and you're laying under a bush weeping and crying. And the angel needs to show up and say, what's wrong with you? Fear not. See the little asterisk. Go back to chapter 16. So I think sometimes that angel needs to shake us like that. Now, let's go back to Abraham for just a second. I want to say that Abraham also wanted to say, let me not see the death of my child, but I will not run away. Hagar said, don't let me see the death of my child, and ran away. I believe on the way up that mountain, Moriah, Abraham would have said, I don't want to see the death of my child, but I will not run away. Even when you can't do anything to stop it, it is always your obligation to be there. Think about that statement. Even when you cannot do anything to change it or to stop it. As saints of God, it is still our obligation to be there. One of the job descriptions, if you look at the pastoral job description nationwide, somewhere on there in the job description, it should say, must have the strength to watch train wrecks in slow motion and not run. Brother John, am I right? Because as a pastor, so many times, we watch people's lives falling into train wrecks, and it's in slow motion, and as a pastor, you're jumping up and down screaming, get off the train! Get off the train! And the train just runs right off the bluff, and they're looking at you out the window going, what? What? You know, but still, we stand there and love. Remember, the Word of God says, they will know we are Christians by our love. Do you know the greatest way to exhibit love is when you cannot fix it and you cannot change it, to still be standing there saying, I will not leave you. I'll still be here. When the train comes crashing down at the bottom of the pile, when the fires of your life burn completely out and the ashes grow cold, when the trouble is as troubled as it can be, and all the smoke settles and the dust clears, I will still be standing right here loving you. How many broken, wounded people who have fallen in despair in your life have done things to push you away, hurt your feelings, and ran you off in their brokenness and despair, not because they didn't really want you there, but because they didn't feel worthy of your presence. They felt so low and so broken that they felt completely unlovable, and because you were trying to love them, the easiest thing to do was just hurt you and make you leave. And so what they did was they pushed you away, and what they really wanted to hear you say was, as hard as it is, I'll still be standing right here when you're done. I can't necessarily financially support you. I can't necessarily embrace what you're doing. I can't allow your drama to come into my home or into my life, but I still love you very much. I'm still right here. I'm going to love you as best I can while this is going on in your life, and I'm not going to be moved. And when the dust settles and you look up, I'm still going to be right here. I won't leave you. Isn't that what Jesus does for us in our life? I will never leave you or forsake you doesn't mean while life is a party and everything's good, I will never leave you or forsake you. It means when life is falling apart and the fires of life are consuming you, I will never leave you or forsake you. I will be right here. That's a hard thing for us to do. It's so hard to watch people go through self-destructive attitudes and do things. But when they come out, we need to be standing there with arms wide open. And when they cry out, help, we say, okay, I am. Any comments or questions on that? I want you to notice something here. God did not hear a desperate cry based on doubt. He heard a silent cry based on promise. Hagar was desperately crying out in doubt. Ishmael was silently crying out in promise, in faith. God heard the silent cry of promise before he heard the desperate cry of doubt. And notice this. Hagar was mourning the death of a child who was not dead. I mean, she had no faith in covenant. Abraham counted Isaac dead from the beginning, yet did not openly mourn. Why? Because he had faith. Think about it. Isaac was dead to Abraham when they were in the camp, when they were gathering the wood, when they were walking to the base of the mountain, when he told the servants to wait on him at the bottom of the mountain, when they were packing the wood up the mountain, up all the way through. In Abraham's heart, Isaac was dead. He had made the decision in the camp. And yet in that, he never left Isaac. He always said, here I am, here I am, here I am, here I am. Hagar had a son that was not dead, yet because of her doubt, she was mourning him already. Abraham had a son that in his own mind was dead already, but never openly mourned because he had great faith. He would not mourn that death because he had faith to believe. Hagar mourned a death that hadn't even happened yet because she had no faith. She had no faith. He was not distracted by a future too terrible to contemplate. His faith left tomorrow in God's hands, and he would not be distracted from the today because of what might happen tomorrow. Hagar was so distracted by what was going on today that she couldn't even hope for tomorrow. Had no hope at all. There was no hope left within her. Oh, I got only too much to say, and already gone too long. So I'm gonna finish this tonight. I'm gonna do it very, very quickly. So why did Ishmael have to happen, and why did Isaac have to happen? Let's look at, why didn't Ishmael count as the promise? And think about this. God said to Abraham, you do exactly what Sarah tells you to do. Now, he was not the son of promise, he was the son of the flesh. And God said to Abraham, you do exactly what Sarah tells you to do. Sarah said, divorce him and get rid of him. Abraham doesn't divorce her, he casts her off. Abraham sends her away with water and bread. Let me ask you a question. Was Abraham poor or rich? As a matter of fact, he was so rich and had so many cattle and so many servants that the other nations around him would fear when he crossed through their land, afraid that he was going to overtake them because he had such vast herds and servants, and he had an army that was big enough to go actually get Lot and his family and fight a war. He wasn't poor. His firstborn son, 13 years old, he gives him bread and water and not even enough of that to survive, and puts his foot in his back and kicks him out. Abraham's rich. He could have and should have given him 1/2 of everything he had. God didn't say send him away destitute. God said do what Sarah says. Sarah says divorce him, which means give them their share and send them away. Give her a writ of divorcement. Turn her loose. Why did he not do it? I'm going to tell you why. Remember, whenever God said that, he said, when God said, I'm going to give you a son and make a promise, and he said, but what about Ishmael? Ishmael's my son too. Remember, Hagar had already ran off once, and what did she do? The first time, she ran off while she was pregnant, and God spoke to her, and she came back home. In Abraham's mind, Abraham did not fully obey God the first time. He failed the test. The first test was divorce her, do what your wife's telling you, divorce her, send him away with what's his. Abraham gives them just enough bread and just enough water to not even get all the way out of land he owned. He owned the well of Beersheba. He gives them just enough to get out there, and his hope was she's going to get hungry and thirsty, and she'll be home tomorrow. She'll be back. She's done this once before. I'll make it look like I'm obeying. I'll give them a little bread. I'll give them a little water. I'll send them on the way. He gave them no servants to help them. Didn't give them a pack mule to carry their stuff. Gave them nothing. Just enough to make Sarah happy. I'll get mama off my back. I'll send them out. I'll stand here like this for 24 to 48 hours. I'm going to see Ishmael coming. And when he comes back, I can say, but God, I did what you said. I did what you told me. My way, my thinking. I'm going to manipulate it and get what I want. I want Ishmael home. He's my son. In reality, think about this. Ask yourself this question. Had Abraham passed the test the first time and done exactly what he was supposed to and sent Ishmael away with half of everything he owned, with a right of divorcement for his mother, sent him away with servants and goods, would there be such animosity and hatred today between the Muslims and the Jews? Interesting thought. Because Ishmael spent the rest of his life with a heart of bitterness and anger because he walked away from the riches of his father at age 13 and felt the bitterness and burn of rejection the rest of his life, because in his life, my daddy rejected me, gave me nothing, and sent me away impoverished when my daddy was a rich man, and he loved that son more than he loved me. In reality, in Abraham's mind, I'm trying to manipulate the situation. I'll get my son back and he'll have all of this. But because Abraham tried to manipulate it and do it his way, Abraham failed test number 1, which necessitated test number 2. Notice in test number 1, Abraham, something very big happened right there. Notice all the way through Abraham's life, Abraham would get a word from God, he would build an altar. Abraham got a word from God, he built an altar. Abraham get a word from God, he built an altar. Every time Abraham, something big in Abraham's life, Abraham built an altar. Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael, and when he weaned those boys, that was a special day, big day, had feasts and stuff. He never built an altar. What happened? Abraham stopped trusting in God and stopped trusting in the strength of his son. He began to withdraw from God, and the tests began to come. And because he failed test number 1 with Ishmael and did not do what he was told, long-term, thousands of years of consequence have taken place, and it necessitated test number 2. Isn't that interesting thinking? Now, I can't tell you that I'm 100% right on that. That is Chad's opinion. That is my opinion. But look at it in the Scripture and see what you think. But there's several things in there that we could several questions we could answer. But I think I want to kind of finish up with Ishmael. I don't want to spend too much time on him and leave you with that. So anyway, any other comments or questions on those guys before we quit tonight? All right. I appreciate you so much for being here. Next week, let me give you a little nugget of what we're going to be looking at next week. We're going to talk about Jacob, man of truth or man of deception. Which one is he? The great healer, not H-E-A-L-E-R, H-E-E-L-E-R. The great healer. We're going to look at Jacob, at the life of Esau and Jacob. Y'all all know about the pot of stew, right? And the loss of the birthright. So we'll look at that next.